Well, thank you all for being here this evening. It's a beautiful wintry day in Calgary. And as always, when we run these sessions, wellness through mindfulness, it's always good to start with experience. So the first thing we're going to do actually is to experience something. And the topic for tonight is related to surrendering. I'm not going to say much more, but I hope to walk you through an experience of surrender and then to see what comes up. And then the talk afterwards is really commentary on what you've experienced. The reason I often start with an experience is it keeps us in the now. It keeps us in the mindful moment. It keeps us present. And we watch what happens in the mind. And the mind has always got its stories, ideas, and especially around a topic like surrender, there's often resistance because it's a word a lot of people can easily misinterpret or misunderstand or dislike. Because surrender can feel like weakness or loss or vulnerability, can be associated with fear or some character flaw or giving up. And so there's a natural tendency for the mind to go, I don't want to go there. And so the topic is to really be about surrendering, and we'll do the experience first. Usually with this, I usually start to just close my eyes, and if you are comfortable in closing your eyes, please do so. And to make yourself as comfortable as you can, whatever way you need, with your legs, your seat, any adjustments. And I want to say that surrender is something that can be challenging. And if you happen to have your eyes closed and you find any strong feelings, any very aversive emotions coming up, you're having difficulty staying with the invitational instructions, just open your eyes, do what you need to do. If you need to get up, you need to walk, it's absolutely fine. Because all that is also in the service of looking after ourselves, being compassionate and kind and loving and gentle. So to begin, which has already happened a moment or two ago, we set the intention to just allow ourselves with ease and permission to go on a little walk inside ourselves and to look at the topic of surrender. And surrender is a practice that can come to us in every moment of the day, because we often have stories about how things shouldn't be this way, or how we prefer things to be that way, or if only I this, or if only they that. And so there's often moments of resistance throughout the day. We don't like something. The Buddhists call this aversion. The ego says, I'm not in control when that comes up. Our feelings go into frustration or resistance. And those things all just come up. And that's okay that they come up, because we're wired that way. And we can notice that without criticism of what the thinking and feeling mind does and how it operates. We can just bring ourselves back to following the instructions. So gently just bringing your attention to the body as it is. And surrendering any ideas of how your body should be right now. and noticing whatever is present, whether it's unpleasant or neutral or pleasant. Instead of fighting that ache or that tiredness, instead of going into some story about why your posture is not the way it should be, you can just settle into noticing, surrendering to the capacity for watching what already is present. And all of us who've done any sitting are aware of the breath. We can bring the attention, we shift our attention to the breath. And in a way, we can let go of any ideas of how the breath should be. Just in that simple act, we are surrendering any control that we need to have over the breath. Because the breath is a good friend. The breath with perfection knows exactly what to do. So allowing yourself to render unto the breath, to give yourself over to its natural rhythms. Perhaps even noticing that there's a little piece of your mind that goes, wow, there's something here I don't need to be in control of. What a little relief, perhaps. And as we give ourselves over to surrender, as we begin to let go of the stories in our head, which are constantly going, we notice that there's a hint, or maybe more than a hint if you've practiced this a few times. There's a certain kind of stillness and quiet and centeredness and rootedness or peace. Maybe even an inner silence. The silence is not empty. That inner silence is a certain kind of heartfelt space, a certain kind of soulfulness. There's a gentle quality to it. And when the mind goes off, you say, not right now, thank you. I'm busy surrendering to what this moment has to offer. And if there is any resistance to this kind of surrendering, just examine that resistance, whether it's a sensation in the body, in particular in the stomach or the chest, whether that resistance or aversion is a tightening, tension in your muscles, whether there's a story going on about surrender or letting go. Just notice it all. Just observe what your body, your mind does as it embraces surrender. Imagining perhaps what it might be like to just for a few minutes let go a little bit. To allow the imagination and just see what comes up. And remembering that stillness and silence is where everything is born. It's out of the silence and the stillness that ideas come. We surrender to a kind of flow. There's stillness and then there's movement. And when we've allowed the mind to settle, we surrender to the silence. We can bring a certain kind of curiosity, interest, and to see what starts to stir. What else is at work in what's been called the psyche, the bigger psyche? And the word psyche is the root of psychology and psychiatry, and it's the Greek word for soul. Something deeper. Call it energy, call it spirit, call it heart, call it humanity, call it the ground of your being, call it the spirit of God, call it cosmic consciousness, it doesn't matter. It's those other pieces inside of us that are there all the time, in addition to thinking and feeling. And in this surrendering to the silence, you can ask yourself, what is wanting to be heard? What might be calling me right now? What is needing my attention? What would make my life ... Fill in the blank. Kinder, gentler, more fulfilling. What do I need to be well in the world? What parts of me have been neglected? What parts of me are wanting my attention? I'll sum this up in my favorite question, which is, what's called for? And we rest and we listen. There's a different language that we start to hear when we surrender our thoughts and ideas and judgments and planning. Thinking is the language of the mind. Imagination is the language of the soul. And perhaps noticing that surrendering in this way it's really hard to identify anything you've lost. Surrendering to possibility, surrendering to hearing a new story, surrendering to listening to the song in your heart that you haven't sung to yourself for a while. Surrendering to inner guidance. Surrendering the little ego-centered I, me, mine, self to a much bigger and richer inner world. And generally what comes up falls into a number of different categories. It may be a particular practice. It's an awareness that perhaps you need to give yourself a bigger hug. You need to be more patient. You need to let go. You need to celebrate or show gratitude. So there may be one particular topic. For others, it might be a particular topic, a matter that's calling your attention. Something related to relationship, or work, your place in the world. You've neglected joy. For others, it may just be the peace and the centeredness and the quiet that might be sufficient for doing this just a few times every day, for 5-10 minutes. Because when we resist, we avoid, we shut down, we become constricted in fear and afraid of losing. And then we shut the door on all these other possibilities. And that shutting down actually lessens our life, because we try to control what is often uncontrollable. We exhaust ourselves in resisting it. So surrendering is an opening to possibility and freedom. Freedom from the old stories and freedom to make space for something new. It's more life-affirming and giving. And yes, surrender can be difficult because of what might be coming up, what we need to surrender to. And there's work that still lies ahead, but at least there's a path ahead and not a shut door. There's movement. So as we listen into the stillness, whatever comes up in terms of a feeling, a sensation, a possibility, an idea, an opening, is movement. And then when there's movement, there's energy. And when there's energy, we can direct it in more wholesome ways. And when we direct them in more wholesome ways, that's called wisdom. The 4 stations of the heart, or the Brahma Viharas, as Phil mentioned earlier. Joy, compassion, loving kindness, and equanimity. For ourselves and for the world. And it's in those still, quiet moments that we turn. We turn from constriction to openness. And we take that first step. And we realize that the world doesn't collapse. because the new path unfolds as you walk it. And as you walk it, you build your confidence, and there's no going back. So surrender is a letting go. There is an element of grief and loss to it. But the possibility for finding something new, life affirming and beautiful and creative always lies ahead. And that's basically what hope is. That somehow this makes more sense than the way things used to be. See, with intention and permission, we can practice surrender in big ways and little ways. And we realize that it's a doorway to growth. So taking another 2 or 3 deep breaths at your own pace. As best as you can, if your eyes have been closed, opening them. Rather noticing when surrendering to when your eyes want to open themselves. I'd like to ask anyone who wishes to, and there's no pressure, using a single word, if you want to just say out loud what came up for you. In one word.
Much needed.
Much needed.
Small especially for us. It's what
Yeah. Much needed. Okay. And I'll try and incorporate as many of these words as I can in the talk. Anyone else?
peacefulness. Peacefulness.
Peacefulness. I think was another. Freedom.
Anger.
Anger.
Tension.
Tension.
Roots.
Rooted.
Struggle.
Struggle.
Release.
Release. It's always interesting how we have these opposites always exist with each other. Release, tension, struggle, freedom. Needed. All of it, because it all exists. What I have to say is really commentary and summary on what we've all just experienced. Life is a process. There's flow, there's ups and downs, there's pairs of opposites, there's night and there's day, there's cold and there's warm. We're constantly living in this. There's anger and peace, there's freedom and struggle. And the invitation is always to think about how we're going to meet that. What kind of qualities can we bring? What kind of process can we engage in? that's going to help navigate those realities. I bet you all of us in this room have felt all these feelings that people have mentioned. And near the beginning of the sit, I mentioned whether it's pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Part of surrendering is surrendering to the reality that all of that exists for all of us. Sometimes more, sometimes less, sometimes intensely, sometimes of our own making, sometimes by the making of others in the world around us. And so the first point of surrender is to actually recognize that this is it. It's all of it. It's mucky. And nobody promised that it would be nice. And that doesn't mean we don't do anything. Surrender is not giving up. Surrender, the first step, is recognizing that this is how it is. He has anger. He has frustration. He has pain. He has grief. I'll talk about the tough stuff first, because that's the stuff we often resist. We don't want to feel this way. It's not nice. And then we add layers like, I don't want to be an angry person, or we talk to somebody else and, am I justified in being angry? We gather all our friends and we start to judge what is. And it just goes down a rabbit hole, because inevitably it doesn't help. It just doesn't help to judge what is, in the sense of trying to ask yourself, is this right or wrong? It just is. He has a lousy moment. So surrendering into it, and this is part of mindful practice, that you sit with something. That's a big part of mindful practice, to actually sit with it and not react to it, to investigate it, to look at it and to say, oh, here's some anger. I wonder what this is about. Let me look at it. Because it's only when we make an accurate inner diagnosis of it, we understand all its complexity in the story and how far it goes back and what your triggers are to that anger or to the struggle. And as I was thinking about the topic for tonight, that, surrender, where did that come from? Okay, surrender. Well, that's not a nice subject, Alan. Okay, go into it, Alan. Let's really start to look at it. Because I also have that aversion to giving up. Who wants to give up? But when we lean into these unpleasant things and we examine them with our heart and our soul and our spirit and our conscience and our humanity, and we suffer it, the word suffering means endurance. And I'm glad we've had the tough stuff coming up here, the struggle and the anger. Because then we say, what's actually struggling in there? What is that about? Where's that coming from? Whose issue is it? Have I been hanging on to this anger for 50 years? Really? Can I offer the anger as I surrender into it and I realize that I've exhausted myself? I recognize that I've got in my own way. So I'm surrendering to myself, but it's in the service of something greater and more productive, life-affirming, creative, intuitive, loving, kind, fill in the blank. The word anger, thank you for bringing it up. The word anger is the same root as the word anguish, which is torment. It's actually the same root as the word anxiety and Angst in German. Interesting that those four words have the same root. So while the mind will justify why I'm feeling angry because whatever the story is, okay, now what? What am I going to do with it? What's my relationship going to be with it? And as a therapist, I was often challenged to come up with an answer that would be helpful for somebody who says, but you don't understand how angry I get, or you don't understand how depressed I get, or how addicted I am, or how anxious. And I say, you're right, I don't know. But I can change my past. I say, I know. But can we change our relationship with it? And we have to surrender into feeling it and knowing it at a very deep level. So that surrendering is a leaning into, and that's where the courage comes up. We need the courage to go, hang on a second, and we need the courage, which comes from the same root as the word cœur in French, which means heart, and the word care. Those three words, and the word core, those words have the same root. Care, heart, courage, and charity, caritas in Latin. Those four words have the same root. Interesting. So courage is a heartfulness to lean into it, and then we open up and we let go. We see what comes up. And it's joyous because what comes up is what's called intuition, what's called wisdom. And instead of the yucky stuff, we look for the yummy stuff. Talk about that. That's official psychiatric language, by the way. Yucky and yummy stuff. It's in the diagnostic categories. I don't use good or bad, if you've noticed. I don't judge it. It's certainly unpleasant is a more accurate description. Unpleasant or neutral or pleasant. Because of darkness, because of anger, I look for peace. Because of struggle, I want to come to a ceasefire. Because of fear, I want to find peace. So by leaning into the very thing we don't want, it's actually the doorway to what it is we do want. That would be more life-affirming, mindful, charitable, joyous, creative. It's much needed. Thank you, the word that came from a participant here tonight. It's much needed. We need this. This isn't a luxury. This isn't some woo-woo new age stuff. This is part of our being. This is how we come alive. Because I'm hungry, I want to eat. As Carl Jung, my favorite psychologist, said, probably my favorite quote of all time, as far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to light a candle in the darkness of mere being. As far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to light a candle in the darkness of mere being. So we don't need to fix the darkness or the anger or the struggle or the pain or the grief or the confusion. We need to lean into it and surrender and go, what's this asking of me? Confusion is asking me for clarity. If I'm confused about something or I don't know what decision to make, that says, you're not quite there yet. Okay, let me sit on it. We sleep on it, we talk about it, we reflect on it. The other thing about the inner space is these other kinds of voices and what we listen to are much quieter than the thinking mind. The thinking mind's got its stories and its rationale and logical and sequential, and I've arrived and this is the conclusion and this is the way it has to be, and the ego says this, I'm right and you're wrong and they're an idiot. You see? And emotions are very strong, they grab us. And what's interesting is that when we think about our senses, our five senses and our thinking is very much oriented, and appropriately so, to navigating the external world. So 20,000 years ago, it was the saber-toothed tigers and the guys in the village who were going to come and hunt me. Well, unless I killed them first. So we're very much oriented to the outside world, to problem solving. So I need a bigger spear than you do. I need more guys in my army than your army. So it's very externally oriented. And so the five senses are outwards, they're very oriented and they're intuitive and they brainstem, and it's fight or flight or freeze. It has a utility, it has a place. But the stuff inside, it's a much quieter place. It's not that we can't experience those things in the outside world, joy and peace and love and connection and creativity and celebration and so forth. It's just that the thinking mind has a much tougher time getting to that kind of experience than going inwards, because that yummy stuff is much more the language of the inner world. Yeah. And so the questions are big, come, and we'll wrap up in a moment or two, just another couple of comments, and then we can take some questions. So having been through this, and sat through this, if you walk away with nothing else tonight, it's just what's called for. What's called for. And what's called for, the answers, the richer, deeper, longer term, forward looking, creative, life affirming answers are not up here, because that's just concept and thinking. So I talk about asking myself what's called for. I go below my neck. I talk about below my neck. Whatever you want to call that inner space, it's fine. We've all got it. Everyone's got it. Mindfulness is the first step in that. It's that setting the intention to be present for what is, to meet it, to recognize the reality of the fullness of our life, the yucky and the yummy. And for each person, that recipe is going to be different. For each person, the issue or issues are going to be different. One of my ongoing challenges for my life is that I'm always jumping into the future. So I have to surrender to the fact that I can't make the future come more quickly. Okay, Allan. So all of us have these things, some more serious, some more difficult, some more challenging. But once we recognize what our curriculum is and what our little hang-ups are, where we get stuck with ourselves, our stories, once we meet it, surrender, Allan, you can't speed it up. Surrender to the fact that there's going to be ice on the roads tomorrow. It's dropping below zero tonight, people. All that slush is going to turn to ice. So I'm going to stop there. Just see what comes up.
So thanks, Allan. So we're going to have our question and answer period now. This is an opportunity to ask any question related to his talk or mindfulness. And bear in mind, this is an educational forum, so limit your questions to what Allan is talking about, not bring up anything that is specific just to you. And we want to be able to, if anybody here has a question you want to ask, so we want to be able to let everybody ask the question. So, with that, does anybody have a question you want to ask?
Kate,
What we talk about surrender. So, where does that lead us? Is it simply to basic as they are, or is it more just salty? Like we get up from to the response on the chain. Well, okay, so obviously, so that relax and that learn to try to make any certain arguments, etc. So I just think that surrender is almost more a mental process rather than a emotional process. Activity, attention. And where's it?
So, repeating the question, the different aspects of surrendering, if I've heard you right, and if I miss anything, let me know. The one aspect is that can it suggest that in some way we give up, or we don't do anything, or we don't move? In response to that, the answer is no, quite the opposite. I said that we are surrendering in the service of giving up a stuckness, because once we have come up against the limits of what our thinking mind can do, our stories about why we write the I, me, mine, my story, you come up against the reality that you're not in control of as much as you thought you were. You're stuck anyway. You've actually cornered yourself. So in fact, in a way, there's that stillness. There's that inertia. There's that lack of momentum and lack of movement. You're actually cornered. I need to surrender. I'm done. I can't do this anymore. A good example is addictions. When the addict is done, the first step in the 12-step program is, I'm done. My addiction has beaten me. I surrender. All the excuses, all the ego, all the rest of it, I'm done. I can't do it anymore. Now that surrendering is not giving up. It's the first step of the 12-step program. But until you surrender to the fact that you can't carry on doing what you're doing, you can't actually make any progress. So surrender is not sitting there and doing nothing. It's quite the opposite. It opens up a vast arena. The second part of your question related, if I understand it, to there is a cognitive part to it, because there's always a cognitive part. There's always a thinking piece. None of the pieces of our inner lives are separated. I'm thinking, I'm feeling, I'm intuiting, I'm analyzing, I'm feeling it in my body. My spirit is saying this, my soul is saying that. There's all this conversation going on all the time. So there's always a cognitive aspect. But as we learn with mindfulness, and that's one of the things at the core of mindfulness as a practice, as you said, that mindfulness is a practice. It's not something you think about. We need to bring our thoughts to thinking about what does it entail. So I need to sit, I need to set aside time, I need to come to meetings, I need to watch the videos, I'm going to buy CDs of John Kabat-Zinn, whatever. But it's not thinking. But there is that, what do I need to do? When you recognize you're stuck. So you bring your cognition, the questions are in the service of what needs to be practiced. The decisions are made perhaps at a deeper level, and then they bubble up. And then they become thoughts and words.
Yeah.
So eureka moments, they come to us. Archimedes in the tub and Archimedes screw or whatever. Artists, they sit there.
Right.
Bernie Taupin writes poetry, gives it to Elton John, looks at the words, he sits at the piano, and his fingers just start doing that. That's the magic and the mystery of creativity. It's coming from inside, but we need to make that room for that deeper kind of knowing and wisdom to come forth. We need to create the space. But as long as we're hanging on to our ideas and our ego is constricted about how it should be, I don't want to surrender. Surrender's weakness and and I'm not going to be a real man if I surrender. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, don't.
Yeah. Reach space.
Right. We're rendering unto Caesar. I don't know the exact part in Julius Caesar. You render unto Caesar. You're giving something. You render something. You bring it forth. Just to surrender is a giving up, but it's giving up in the service of something.
Oh, I like the silence.
Anyone else?
I don't really understand it. The sense of like, you got a tough boss, make sure you point it. Well, there's nothing you can really do. You see? So you can surrender all you want. Reality is every time you go to work, you feel vows. Yeah, and they treat you poorly. So what's the to get back? So yeah.
No, that's fine. It's very nice to have good examples. So here we're into the remember, surrender is about control.
Yeah.
The core of surrender is control, and that's why we fear it. And so, without going into your specific details, of course, because this isn't the forum, but I've got a number of reflections on what you're bringing up. You've got a challenging boss. And I was faced in the situation sometimes with families. In tough situations, there's only really 3 paths that you can follow. I think this applies in such a situation. You can kind of grind on indefinitely. You can bail out. You can fix it. Now, let me particularize it for that situation. Grinding on might mean that, and I'm not committed to any one of these 3 paths because I don't have any skin in the game. I'm just outlining an approach to it. The grinding on could be, I've really got a lousy boss and I'm not respected, and I am surrendering to the reality that I can't change these people. Yet, perhaps I have enough reason that I'm going to stay here for a while in this particular work circumstance, for whatever reasons you have. You may love the work, you may love the clients, you may love part of your team. The money might be good. You need the money right now. So surrendering to the fact that you can't control the boss, that might be one version of grinding on.
Yeah.
Another version is that, and you may or may not have done this, that you can talk and see what can be done. Maybe it is a toxic organization or a toxic company. Maybe there are enough people who, and often the voice of one person is not enough because you can become the complainer. Oh, there he goes again. There's Allan complaining. But if there's two or three of you, then add some voice and you can think about bringing something forth and looking and making some change. You do what you can, given the circumstances. Make some conversations. Or you can bail out and you say, you know what? I'm not putting myself through this. It's too disrespectful. There isn't enough recognition of my work and my contribution and my efforts. But whatever you decide to do, it's going to fall into one of those three categories. Grind on, fix it, or bail out. Those are the only three options. Each of those has got pros and cons. And each person, depending on their particular circumstances, is going to mindfully try and make the best decision you can. Sometimes the decision gets made for you. Sometimes it comes in a flash and you wake up one morning and you say, you know what? I'm giving 2 weeks notice. I'm done. Sometimes it's, I know that I can't change the boss, but you know, the rest of the team's okay. So the surrendering to what is, if I can summarize again, bring this back to the surrender. Surrendering to what is, surrendering to what are the possibilities, what are the paths, and what would help me the best in a set of lousy circumstances. What would be best for me? Short term, medium term, and maybe long term. And no one can tell you what to do because you are the only one who's experiencing your life in that deep, rich way. But at least surrendering to what is and surrendering to listening to what's inside. So some people can tolerate for quite a while not being respected at work. And other people, I'm out of here. Right? And they won't be there for a month and they go, other people put up with it for years. I'm not saying either of those are right or wrong. Yeah. It's a mindful reflection of what are the options, and there are no easy answers.
Yes. So, in that scenario that is just suppose, as soon as you start trying to eat scenarios, who's that you thinking about? So, how do you know? Like, how do you get deeper at something as sense of this versus thinking more into those farms and the different options?
Oh, okay. So yeah, three paths. Three paths. And so let me assume that perhaps there's a lot of anger and stuckness and resentment going on in such a work situation, which is completely understandable. Then it becomes, what's my anger asking of me? What do I do? What's my anger trying to tell me? Is my anger reminding me that I don't like being disrespected like this?
Really?
Is my anger the fact that I have expectations that everyone in the world's going to be nice? And now they're not, so I'm actually disappointed. So they often say that anger is a secondary emotion. So we can be angry because things didn't go our way. We can be angry because somebody cut us off in traffic. There can be righteous anger as a protest against injustice. So anger always has other layers underneath it. It just happens that we're built to fight. We get angry. It's brainstem. So to really listen inwards, what is the issue? And then can you live with that? Can you put up with it? So sometimes we are, sometimes we aren't able to say, this isn't about me. This is about the other person. I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me. Their stuff is hitting the metaphorical fan and I'm getting splattered. And yeah, it stinks. But it's not me. So some people are able to put up a bit of a buffer and let it kind of bounce off them. That this isn't my stuff. I'm not taking this on. This isn't about me. Is it affecting me? Yes. It's not mine. Other people are going to have a very hard line about how much lack of respect or toxicity they're going to put up with. So what I'm saying in another way is what you do is informed by the full story that you are listening to inside yourself. You're listening to, what do I do? But what do I do is not the first question. The first question is, what's going on? What's my understanding of it? What's inside? How do I want to show up in the world with this? What's my response going to be? Wisely, ethically, joyously, life-affirmingly, productively? Is this an environment I want to flourish in? We ask ourselves these questions all the time. And then when we answer those deeper questions on the other side of thinking, then we will know what we need to do. But the thinking mind will often say, well, what do I need to do? Should I quit? No, that's not the first question. You might end up quitting, but after a whole lot of really, really looking at it. Because if you quit in anger, somehow that doesn't feel right because it was rushed. I don't know if that's a help at all. It's a way of thinking about it. So yes, thinking is there. And I haven't said anything yet tonight about not thinking because it's part of our makeup. Please.
That's such a question that I think is part of the conducting like surrendering it. Question is like what's I think like maybe really the results. Surrenders for both surrendering in the process, make present it is of it process and answer like arrive to the process.
Yes.
But all we can really control is teaching in that process. And the answer of the pet.
Yes. So repeating the comment about we're surrendering to a process, and the thinking mind wants to get to the answer. What the answer? I need to know what to do. The chance. And so the surrendering to the process, and then the process, it will declare itself. There's a story about the potato farmer, and a person stops at the side of a road and sees the farmer, and he says to the farmer, "How do you grow such lovely potatoes?" The guy says, "I don't grow potatoes." The guy in the car says, "What do you mean you don't grow potatoes?" He said, "I tend the soil and the potatoes grow themselves." So the process of allowing things to come through in their own time, surrendering to the fact that you can't jump into the future, surrendering to the fact that it's complicated, And so we need to bring in all the factors. And especially at difficult times, the ones that we use as our guides. So whether it's love or joy or creativity or compassion or beauty or peace or fulfillment, whatever your recipe is, come to those. What gets you out of bed in the morning? What do you want most in life? And everybody has these deep, deep yearnings for something.
Yeah.
For some people it's business. For some people it's dancing. I know lots of people in the room here. I know people in business in this room, and educators and geologists and therapists and gastroenterologists and business people and dancers and musicians in this room right now. That's who you are. And to keep in touch mindfully with what that is. When you stay in touch with that, below the neck, it never lets you down. Ever. That's what makes it true. That's what makes these things universal. That's the power of the human spirit. It's the power of, call it soul, or a soul contract, or whatever it is. It's that one thing that if somebody said, I'm going to take that away from you, it would feel like they're ripping your heart out. You can't tell a dancer not to dance. You can't tell a geologist not to dig. Geologize. You can't tell a gastroenterologist to not boldly go where no man has gone before. We still have a few minutes. Any other comments or questions or? Yes, please, my man.
Opinion and the idea that we are all wired to be up. And we're all city.
What's my idea on the idea that we are wired to be unhappy and that we're always looking for happiness? I think that's a fabulous realization. That we often, for survival reasons, we default to fight or flight or freeze. For survival reasons, it's really cold. I have to figure out how I'm going to stay warm. There's saber-toothed tigers, or there's an enemy in another vision. So that creates tension and anguish and unhappiness. It's not a nice way of being. It's anguish and torment. So that's how we're wired in that sense. And then we're looking for three things: feeling safe, loved, and worthy. I want to feel safe, I want to feel loved and be loved and love things, and I want to feel worthy. Let's sprinkle a few other ingredients like joy and creativity and celebration, fun, a good meal now and again. So that, rather than an idea, I saw your comment as I didn't actually respond from my head. I was going to respond from my head, and then I caught myself. What do I think about the idea that we're wired to be unhappy? No, it's how it is. There is unhappiness. There is suffering, the first of the Four Noble Truths in Buddhism. There is suffering. And people often forget the second half of that first truth. There is suffering and a cure for suffering. And the second, the third, and the fourth outline what that path is, of how to undo that. So that surrendering to the reality is the first noble truth in Buddhism. There is evil in the world. In the monotheistic traditions, they call it evil. There is heart and sorrow and grief and loss and all that stuff. But because of it, I want to light the candles. What do you think?
Yeah, I just love the immediate of the green book and mentioned like the dark race of human being.
Yes. As far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of it. And what he's saying there is this recognition that, yeah, it's dark. And the only response is to light candles. Every tradition all around the world lights candles.
That unfit.
Oh, please.
Even probably the years. Is it possible for a society that collected surrender awareness by caring its will? Heck yeah.
I'll repeat the question. Given the sufferings and in the world that today, without getting specific because there's a number of them, is it possible for society to have an inner awareness and an awakening? The collective. Back to Carl Jung, yes. Back to Carl Jung. So Jung spoke about a personal unconscious, the stuff inside that we can tap into, our shadow side, the difficulties. But what happens is that in a culture, it becomes a mythology. So what happens is a collective idea becomes a mythology. So the West is angry at the East. And the white folks are angry at the black folks, and the Muslims are angry at the Jews, right? And the Jews are angry at the Christians, and the Christians are angry at the Catholics in Northern Ireland, are angry at the... Yeah. So these ideas can become part of a zeitgeist. They can become part of a collective, and they can be very dangerous, but they can also turn around. So Germany today has got the strictest anti-hate laws on the planet because of Nazi Germany. Can there be a turning? Yes. The white government, Tom and I are South African, the white government, last white PM, he said, this can't carry on. We need to change. It can't carry on. Apartheid can't carry on in South Africa. We just can't do this anymore. So there can be a turning. Yes, there can be a collective turning for the worse. There can be a collective turning for the better. Absolutely. Northern Ireland proved it. And there were people on both sides who said, you're capitulating, you're surrendering to the orange side. You know, the orange men and the Republicans. You can't do this, you're a traitor. And we see it in a country south of the border, and it's crept north of the border yet too. The us and the them stuff. This is terrible. It's nasty, and it's very dark places. So yes, I don't think it's an unfair question at all. What do you think? You answer your own question about...
Well, it seems to me that government is personal identification with the mythology. There's the mythology and the triggers identified the other shape. And then they take on that and I think it's cool. And it seems to me that out of that is to surrender to the music. And they reverse that.
Yeah.
But in the moments, stories.
Yeah.
In each other.
Yeah. It reminds me that the inner world is often filled with images. Carl Jung talks about them. It's filled with images, the hero figure or the feminine or the masculine or the shadow side or my angry side or my nice side or whatever. And we have all these images and words going on inside. And Joseph Campbell, who's another guy who spoke about the four functions of mythology. This has really struck me when I heard it. The first is to keep you in touch with a mystery. How does it happen that everyone's capable of love and joy? What is the mystery of that? So mythology keeps us in touch with the mystery. It invites us to think about our place in the cosmos and the universe. Whenever little Allan's story becomes constricting, assuming there are clouds at night, walk outside and I look up at the stars and I'm immediately taken out of myself. What's my place on the planet and society? The third function of myth is that it can inform the culture and the society we're in, for good or bad. That's exactly the issue. And the fourth function is the personal. What can this teach me about the world? What can my anger teach me? What does it mean for me to be a hero? What does it mean for a woman to be in touch with her masculine aspect? Ian calls it the animus, and the man, it's the feminine side. So we can really start to look at the whole big picture, and it informs at all the levels of our being. And on that note, with 3 minutes left, Phil always says 3 take-home lessons. Now the take-home lessons. At the core of all of this meeting's about mindfulness, and mindfulness is about being present on purpose to meet what is, to recognize the resistance, and then to just examine it without judgment and just sit with it and see what it is. This evening, I focus in on a particular aspect of how to do that, which is surrender. What surrender means and what it doesn't mean, and how surrendering to something, you're opening yourself up to a deeper part of what's going on inside.
Yeah.
And the natural compassion and kindness and all that is already there, that's inherent to every single human being. Warring factions on both sides, wherever it is throughout history, they want the same thing. They want to feel safe, loved, and worthy. They want a better life for their children in the future. Period. End of discussion.
Yeah.
Everybody wants that. It's no different. So keep on surrendering. Is it a quick comment or?
Well, I just wanted to ask, how can you make mindfulness not be temptation? To be mindful of it. You're just in that.
You notice that you're mindful of ruminating, and then you say to yourself, you come back to investigating what the rumination is about. You examine that as a process in and of itself.
But, yeah.
And you look at that as an activity of the mind that's not functional. This isn't helping me. So what's called for? What would I rather be doing instead of ruminating? Ask that, and that'll turn you towards what would I rather be doing? And then you've got a direction you want to move in. Thank you.